Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the platform on this Friday afternoon. My name is SEKHOSANA. I want us to talk about the recent developments involving President Cyril Ramaphosa. The High Court stops the Phala impeachment hearings. A constitutional shutdown between Parliament and the presidency. I want to test your views, guys. Do you think that President Cyril Ramaphosa is being protected by the courts of this country? Feel free, guys, go to your comment sections and give me your views. Do you think that the courts are protecting President Cyril Ramaphosa from taking accountability and from being held accountable, especially on this issue of Phala? Especially on this issue of Phala, guys. So the Western Cape High Court, right, has granted him an interdict against the Parliament's work. South Africa has witnessed yet another extraordinary chapter in one of the most controversial political sagas of the democratic era. For me, Phala has become a much bigger scandal than Nkandla ever was. Do you agree with me that Phala has turned out to be the biggest scandal than Nkandla, and also dragged longer than the Nkandla's saga? In a ruling that could have far-reaching implications for the balance of power between Parliament, the presidency, and the courts, the Western Cape Division of the High Court has granted President Cyril Ramaphosa an interim interdict, temporarily halting the public hearings of Parliament's Section 89 impeachment, right, investigating the Phala matter. The decision comes after intense legal arguments, fierce political opposition, and growing public anticipation surrounding what many believe will become one of the most significant parliamentary accountability processes since the advent of democracy. But today, being the 24th of July, 2026 rather, the court effectively pressed the pause button to that process. Not permanently, not finally, but decisively enough to stop the committee from proceeding with public hearings until the president's review application is heard later this year. And that raises critical questions. Did the court protect the integrity of the legal process? Or did it interfere with Parliament's constitutional responsibility to hold the executive accountable? Has President Ramaphosa secured an important legal victory? Or has he merely bought himself time before an even larger political battle unfolds? So this afternoon, we break down every aspect of this historic judgment. Welcome back to to the Labour Guide channel. If you are interested in serious political analysis, constitutional affairs, governance, and major stories shaping South Africa's future, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Today's story is not simply about President Cyril Ramaphosa. It is not simply about Parliament. And it is certainly not only about Phala. At its core, this case is about how constitutional democracy functions when two powerful institutions of state appear to be moving in opposite directions. The court on one side, Parliament on the other, and standing directly between them, the President of the Republic. Let us unpack exactly what happened. What the court decided. The Western Cape High Court delivered a split decision after considering an agent application brought by President Cyril Ramaphosa. The President sought an interim interdict to prevent Parliament's Section 89 Impeachment Committee from commencing public hearings while he pursues a separate review application challenging the legal foundation upon which the committee was established. The court ultimately ruled in his favor. However, the judgment was not unanimous. 3 judges considered the matter. 3 separate judgments were produced, and the court was divided. A majority of 2 judges supported granting the interim interdict. 1 judge disagreed and would have dismissed the application. That means the final order of the court reflects the position of the majority. As a result, public hearings of the Section 89 committee cannot proceed for now. This is important to understand. The committee itself has not been dissolved. The impeachment process has not been terminated. Parliament has not been stripped of its constitutional authority. Instead, the court has temporarily suspended a crucial component of the process while another legal challenge is resolved. That distinction is absolutely critical because many headlines will frame today's decision as either a complete victory for Ramaphosa or a complete defeat for Parliament and accountability. In reality, neither interpretation is entirely accurate. This ruling is more appropriately described as a temporary legal intervention pending a larger constitutional battle still to come. Why the ruling matters. To understand why this ruling matters so much, we need to appreciate what was about to happen. The Section 89 committee was preparing to begin public hearings into one of the most politically explosive controversies of recent years. These hearings were expected to place the president's conduct under intense scrutiny. Witnesses could potentially be called. Evidence could be examined. Questions could be asked publicly. And the proceedings could likely dominate national political discourse for weeks or even months. For any sitting president, such a process carries enormous political consequences. Even before any final findings are made, even before any recommendation is adopted, even before any vote takes place, the public nature of such proceedings creates political realities that cannot easily be reversed. And that is precisely where the legal dispute emerged. Ramaphosa's legal team argued that if the underlying basis for the inquiry might later be declared unlawful, allowing such public hearings to proceed now could create irreversible consequences. The opposition disagreed strongly, and that disagreement became the central issue before the court. The split decision. One of the most fascinating aspects of today's judgment is the fact that the court itself was divided. This was not a straightforward case, nor was the outcome obvious. The existence of a split decision or split judgment tells us that serious constitutional questions were at stake. According to the court's announcement, 3 separate judgments emerged from the deliberations. One judgment concluded that the president had failed to establish the requirements necessary for an agent interdict, an agent interim interdict. That judge believed the application should be dismissed. The second judgment concluded the opposite. It found that the president had established sufficient grounds to justify temporary intervention by the court. The third judgment agreed with that conclusion. Together, the second and third judgments formed the majority. And in our legal system, the majority view becomes binding. What this means is that while the court ultimately sided with Ramaphosa, the decision was not unanimous. There was a legitimate judicial disagreement regarding the correct constitutional approach. That fact alone will likely become a major point of discussion among legal scholars, constitutional experts, and political commentators over the coming days and weeks. Because whenever judges disagree on matters involving separation of powers, accountability, and constitutional oversight, it usually signals that the issues involved are exceptionally complex. The big constitutional question. At the heart of today's ruling lies a question that goes far beyond Palapala. Can the judiciary temporarily halt Parliament from carrying out one of its constitutional oversight functions? That is essentially what this case was about. Parliament possesses constitutional authority to hold the executive accountable. The courts possess constitutional authority to review unlawful actions and protect constitutional rights. Most of the time, these powers operate independently, but occasionally they collide. And when they do, the Constitution requires judges to draw difficult lines. Where does parliamentary autonomy end? Where does judicial oversight begin? Can a court intervene before Parliament completes a process? Or should it wait until Parliament has reached a final decision? These questions are not unique to South Africa. They arise in constitutional democracies around the world. But in this case, they have become intensely personal and politically significant because they involve the sitting president. Setting the stage for the legal battle. The courtroom battle that led to today's ruling featured some of the country's most experienced legal minds. On one side stood President Ramaphosa's legal team. Their argument was focused on a concept that courts often consider when deciding to grant agent interim relief: one irreparable harm. The president's lawyers argued that once public hearings begin, the consequences cannot simply be undone. Even if the underlying legal foundation of the inquiry is later overturned. Even if the review succeeds, even if a future court finds serious flaws in the process, the political damage, they argued, will already have occurred. The reputational consequences will already have taken effect. The public scrutiny will already have unfolded. And no subsequent judgment could truly reverse those realities. Opposing parties saw things very differently. They argued that Parliament was merely performing its constitutional duties. They argued that accountability cannot be delayed indefinitely. And they warned against creating a precedent where courts routinely intervene in parliamentary oversight processes before they have run their course. Those competing arguments form the foundation of today's decision. And in the next section of this analysis, we will examine those legal arguments in detail. We will unpack exactly what Advocate Wim Trongove argued on behalf of President Ramaphosa. We will explore the counter-arguments presented by Parliament, the EFF, MK Party, ATM and other parties. And we will assess why two judges found one side more persuasive than the other. Now, Trengove versus the opposition, the legal battle that shaped the ruling. So as we recap and re-engagement of that argument. So before the break, we unpacked the High Court's decision to temporarily halt the public hearings of Parliament Section 89 Impeachment Committee. We examined the 2-1 ruling. We examined the split 2-1 ruling and the constitutional significance of the ruling. But now we arrive at the heart of the case, the legal arguments. Because courts not decide cases based on politics most of the time, but sometimes they do. They do not decide cases based on popularity. And they certainly do not decide cases based on social media trends. Courts decide cases according to legal principles. The question before the judges was not whether Cyril Ramaphosa is innocent. Nor was it whether Parliament has the authority to investigate him. The question was much narrower. Should the impeachment committee be allowed to proceed with public hearings before the court determines whether the very report that triggered the process is legally valid? That was the battle. And it was a battle fought by some of South Africa's most experienced constitutional lawyers. The president's case. Representing President Cyril Ramaphosa was senior counsel Advocate Wim Trongove, one of South Africa's most respected constitutional lawyers. His argument focused on several key pillars. The first was the extensive and existence of the pending review application. Remember, the president is not merely challenging the impeachment committee. He is challenging the Section 89 independent panel report itself. That report, chaired by former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo, serves as the foundation upon which the current parliamentary impeachment process rests. According to Ramaphosa's legal team, the review application is not a frivolous challenge. It raises serious legal questions. And if the review succeeds, the report could potentially be set aside. If that happens, an obvious question emerges. What will be the legal status of hearings conducted on the basis of a report that has subsequently been invalidated? That issue becomes central to the president's argument. Think about it this way. Imagine constructing an entire building, months of work, millions of rents spent, hundreds of workers involved. Then someone discovers that the foundation itself was defective. If the foundation collapses, everything built upon it becomes vulnerable. That was essentially the argument advanced by Ramaphosa's legal team. The Section 89 committee argued is proceeding on a foundation that is still under judicial challenge. And until the courts determine whether that foundation is legally sound, proceeding with public hearings creates significant risks. The issue of irreparable harm. Another major component of the president's case involved the legal concept known as irreparable harm. This concept is often crucial in applications for interim interdicts. To obtain urgent temporary relief, an applicant generally must show that waiting for the final determination of the dispute could result in harm that cannot be adequately repaired. Ramaphosa's lawyers argued that public impeachment hearings will create precisely that type of harm. Not because public scrutiny is inherently unlawful, not because accountability is inappropriate, but because once public proceedings begin, their effects cannot simply be reversed. News coverage cannot be undone. Political narratives cannot be erased. Public perceptions cannot simply be reset. And reputational damage once sustained may be impossible to fully repair. The president's legal team argued that this concern becomes especially important when the underlying legal basis for the hearings remain contested before the courts. In their view, proceeding now and resolving the legality later will place the sequence backwards. The review should come first. The hearing should come after. At least that was their position. The opposition strikes back. The opposition parties and parliament's legal representatives saw things differently. Their response was forceful, and in many respects was rooted in a fundamental constitutional concern: separation of powers. The principle lies at the heart of South Africa's constitutional system. Parliament makes laws and performs oversight. The executive implements policy and governs. The judiciary interprets the law and protects constitutional rights. Each branch has distinct powers and responsibilities. The opposition argued that Parliament was exercising a constitutional function expressly assigned to it, holding the executive accountable, investigating allegations of misconduct, examining evidence, and determining whether constitutional standards have been met. From this perspective, judicial intervention risks disrupting Parliament's ability to perform one of its most important constitutional duties. The argument essentially went like this: if courts begin stopping parliamentary processes every time a participant launches a legal challenge, oversight mechanisms could become vulnerable to endless delays. Constitutional accountability could become slower. Investigations could become more difficult. And Parliament's independence could be weakened. The opposition therefore argued that the committee should be allowed to continue its work while the review proceeds separately. In their view, the constitutional system is capable of accommodating both processes simultaneously. The public interest argument. Public interest versus individual harm. Perhaps the most politically powerful argument advanced by opponents of the interdict involves the public interest. The allegations surrounding Phala Phala have generated national debate for years. Questions regarding foreign currency, questions regarding disclosure obligations, questions regarding foreign currency, questions regarding disclosure obligations, questions regarding the handling of the theft, questions regarding accountability. The opposition argued that South Africans have a legitimate interest in seeing these matters examined through constitutional processes. Delaying the hearings, they argued, delays transparency. Delaying the hearings delays accountability. And delaying the hearings postpones answers to questions that many citizens believe deserve public scrutiny. This argument places the judges in a difficult position. On one side stood concerns about potential harm to a sitting president if proceedings move forward on a potentially defective foundation. On the other stood concerns about delaying accountability in a matter of enormous public significance. Neither concern could easily be dismissed. And that helps explain why the court itself ultimately produced a split decision. So, with all of that has been said, I want to hear from you guys that do you think that Cyril Ramaphosa is being protected by the courts? My name is SEKHOSANA, and thank you very much guys for tuning in.